Welcome, everyone, to the Covenant Eyes Church Podcast. I am your host, Karen Potter, Director of Church and Ministry Outreach for Covenant Eyes. This podcast is specifically designed for pastors, priests, church lay leaders, and anyone who is interested in helping people in the church overcome struggles with pornography. This podcast brings together experts from all over the globe to talk about pornography recovery programs, helpful resources, educational content, and it's all designed to help lead people in the church to freedom. I am joined today by my amazing co-host, Sam Black, Director of Education. Thank you for joining me today, Sam. How are you?
Hey, Karen. Good to be with you. We have Nate Larkin on with us today, the founder of the Samson Society. And I wore this sweatshirt. Actually, I got up this morning and I thought, that's a nice, cozy sweatshirt. I think I'll just put that on, forgetting that we were actually interviewing Nate this morning, and Nate bought me this sweatshirt. And if you're just listening, it says, "May the force be with y'all," because Nate and our whole company team, we went to an opening debut of one of the Star Wars films in our little town theater, and Nate was visiting with us and got to join us, and so he sent this to me afterward, and I wear it with pride, Nate. Thank you.
Oh, well, you got to have a little touch of the South to carry around there, especially in the winter. Yeah.
That is so awesome. So Nate, the last time you were in town, actually, I think we all went out to lunch too at the little diner there in town. Yeah. You got the royal treatment when you came to Owasso, Michigan. It was great.
It was wonderful. Just a sweet little town you guys have settled in.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. We are super excited about today's podcast and the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So our topic is going to be called Porn, Abstinence, and a Positive Sobriety. And our guest today, which we've already introduced, is Nate Larkin from the Samson Society. And we are just so honored to have you with us today. So with that, I would love to kick it over to Sam so he can talk a little bit about Nate and how we know each other, and then we'll get started.
Well, Nate is the author of Samson and the Pirate Monks and a number of other books too. And he's been a speaker at many men's events, again, as the founder of the Samson Society. I get the honor of hanging out with Nate some as a newcomer host for Newcomer Meetings, so people learn how they can be part of the Samson Society. But Nate, why don't you just take a second and just talk a little bit about the Samson Society and how it works and what it's all about?
Yeah, okay. Well, Samson is a place designed to be a group within the church. We're an explicitly Christian group. It's a place where Christian believers can bring their real selves and say the real truth. And specifically to walk kind of honestly and in complete transparency around whatever it is in their life that's bigger than they are. Now, for me, that has been, a very long struggle with pornography. That's what got me into recovery. That's what got me, it was after I was caught by my wife 22 years ago now. And, she let me know that she was not going to continue anymore in the relationship in which I was continuing to drift away from her emotionally. Pornography had taken a terrible toll on our marriage, on my emotional and spiritual health. We'd paid a big price. And now that she was aware of what it was, she did a wonderful thing and gave me an ultimatum. And that drove me into a 12-step recovery group. That's where I first encountered this level of transparency, honesty, vulnerability, and found it so refreshing and healing. And so Samson was kind of an effort to kind of recovery for the church, to be able to use our sacred vocabulary to name our higher power, but not to get all churchy, to get really honest. So the Samson Society is a group of Christian guys. Not everybody in Samson is there for porn. I would say, those of us recovering from porn definitely are in the majority, but we've got guys who come to Samson for other things as well. Maybe a struggle with drugs or alcohol or gambling or rage, or even guys who come because of a lifelong battle against anxiety and depression, which oddly enough seems to correlate with isolation, which is where pornography has taken all of us who have that battle. So anyway, that's the Samson Society. It's real simple. It's relational. It's a place where you can make friends and talk completely without filters. The meetings are great, but Samson actually lives between the meetings in conversations between brothers.
Very good. I think that's a good lead off to this discussion about abstinence and positive sobriety.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. Go ahead, Karen. So tell me about, I love to tell folks that I stopped looking at pornography long before I found healing.
Yes.
There's a difference between abstinence and from pornography itself and healing and the recovery journey.
Yeah.
Talk about that in your own way.
Well, I think, we're drawn to porn because we have a deep need. We have a need, all of us have a need for intimacy. We are relational beings. As Christians, we believe that we're made in the image of God. God himself is a relational being. And we're wired to connect. But we can receive messages early on that connection is dangerous, or that our true self is not lovable enough to connect. So most of us learn early on to avoid, to hide in one way or another. It's really risky to reach out and ask to connect with somebody. And that becomes, the stakes get even higher after, during adolescence, when we begin to develop kind of, a sexual interest as well, a romantic one. And if at that point, pornography arrives to offer us a completely safe, imaginary connection with a virtual person, that will have a payoff of arousal and perhaps even trigger that big dopamine cascade and the release of oxytocin, the bonding chemical that happens during climax, and it can feel for the moment as though it met that deep need. But what it's done, what I didn't know as a young man getting involved in pornography and then being drawn deeper and deeper and deeper, even after marriage, what I didn't know was that porn use was actually creating an intimacy disorder. It was making it more difficult for me to connect. What I did know was it always left me lonelier and always left me wanting more. It never met the need. So, and of course, today, the sophistication of modern pornography and all the multiple, the advent of full motion video has been huge in porn. I got started just on glossy men's magazines. But we now know that full motion video completely bypasses the higher portions of the brain where critical thinking takes place and moral judgments are made, actually stimulates a part of the brain that cannot distinguish between real experience and virtual experience. And it can, as you well know, over time, create very strong neural pathways. And once that happens, we really need healing. It does start with abstinence. Abstinence is important. You can't recover without abstinence. But if we don't replace pornography with something that brings real intimacy, there isn't going to be healing. And the odds of relapse are pretty much 100%.
Nate, you started to kind of lean into this a little bit just a moment ago, but with the usage of porn, you kind of talked a little bit about some of the consequences, but not all of them. So what are some of those consequences of using pornography that may not always be immediately noticeable in our lives? And then how did some of those consequences impact your family during your years of addiction? Because I think it's important for people to understand the blast radius is what we call it. But can you go into a little bit of that?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, I think it begins on the emotional level. As I am connecting with and detaching from virtual partners on a regular basis with increasing frequency, I become less willing and less able to actually connect with the real person. So one of the things that my wife Allie noticed as I really got drawn into hardcore pornography a few years into our marriage was she saw me drifting away emotionally. Now, I was also, at this time, I was studying for the ministry, and then I went on into the ministry, into the pastoral ministry. There was this part of me that I had to hide. It led very much to the divided self. So, I was the friendliest guy who would never let you get too close. And always spinning, always pretending. It takes a tremendous amount of psychic and emotional energy to, to animate that religious persona, the one that will be respected and admired and listened to, and the one that'll get, the one that can remain in the profession, and remain in the community, right? So it's exhausting for me, just absolutely exhausting. And here's the thing. Pornography groomed me for more. And I eventually, I rationalized porn use for a long time as some kind of bulwark against adultery. That, I wasn't never going to, I loved my wife. And I thought I would never be physically unfaithful to her. And I dismissed the porn use and really kind of thought it was just, I'm meeting a deep sexual need without bothering my wife. I found all kinds of ways to rationalize it. And then, but when opportunity finally presented itself, the script had been so often rehearsed, it was so familiar that I was on autopilot. And so I found myself unbelievably, I couldn't believe I'd gone there. And once I'd crossed the line, I just could never get back. But I went into the world of prostitution and, all of the commercial sex that, that is available these days. And then, there's all kinds of risk of disease. There were a couple times, that I went for AIDS testing, just terrified at the thought that I might have been in contact. Of course, nothing I could tell my wife, but, what stress. To be able to live just one life and not to have to hide, and to learn, to me, the wonderful thing about 12-step recovery to begin with, and now the Samson Society, it's a place where I found and continue to find on a daily basis intimacy, non-sexual intimacy. I can share whatever I'm feeling and thinking and doing and thinking of doing with another person. And that person isn't going to reject me. That person isn't necessarily going to endorse all you. They're going to give me another perspective on my own life. And that I learned those skills, first of all, in recovery, and then found that I could bring them home. And it's made me a far better partner all the way around, and a far better spouse. It saddens me. I didn't get into recovery until my kids were grown. The youngest was 18 when I got into recovery. I was active, during their growing up years. I didn't last that long in the ministry. I was never caught, but I bailed for fear of being caught, went into business where I had, now I had the funds and even less accountability than I had in the ministry. So I did spend an awful lot of money on porn and prostitutes, commercial sex, one kind or another. But my biggest regret is that I spent my children's childhood. There were, that activity takes time. It takes time away, time that I could have had with them. And it's emotionally crippling. There's a great phrase in Essay. It says that lust kills love. And I have found that to be just so true. It deadens us emotionally. So although I do love my kids there, and today, thank God, enjoy very good relationships with all my kids, and now have the privilege of kind of getting a second shot at parenthood because I'm a grandfather now. I'm a much better grandfather than I was a father. But my kids have required their own healing journeys and their own therapy, and they've made mistakes that they would not have made, quite possibly, if they'd have gotten from me what they needed emotionally during their early years. So yeah, blast radius, that's a great phrase, Karen, the blast radius. Yeah, we want to think that it only affects us. But it's deeply affected my wife. That the trauma of that betrayal when she found out, not just about, she caught me with porn, and eventually when I disclosed what everything else had been, that was just horrendous. So yeah, it's no small thing.
I was reviewing the notes of an interview that I'd done recently, and the man that was speaking said, pornography seemed like it was only one part of my life.
Yeah.
But it was impacting other parts of my life.
Yeah.
I'd been lying about my pornography use since childhood, and those lies led over to other parts, to my work, to my relationship with my wife, the relationship I had with my brothers and sisters in Christ at church, to my relationship with God. And so it continues to bleed out. And he said something that was very impactful. He says, when you've lost your integrity, what do you have left?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you had written in your book that you weren't sure that you would have had 6 men to carry your casket if you. Yeah. That's a lot different than today.
Yeah. It sure is.
I suspect there'd be a parade of men and likely women as well who would be who's going to say, I'll step up to that because of what you've done in their lives, and I'm one of them. Thank you. Hey,
to me, it's just ironic. The one thing that I thought would forever disqualify me from ministry, I would lose all credibility. I'd have no use in the kingdom if anybody ever found out what I'd done. It turns out that my willingness to talk about it frankly, is my greatest asset. It makes me the most useful, the most approachable, the most trustworthy. I'm having a far greater impact for good in the world, having come clean, than I ever would have been able to, keeping it forever a secret.
And I think that is just beautiful because, a lot of people listening to this podcast may be feeling that duality, that lifestyle where there's the real you and then there's the you that's lost in, pornography. And there is hope and there's redemption. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, getting involved in something like Samson Society and being a member of that group can help really free us to explore being honest and open with who we really are with a trusted group of friends. Can you talk a little bit about that for the people that might be listening?
Yeah. I think there's a reason that even during, men's accountability groups and fellowship groups during my, I was active in men's ministry during my years of active addiction. But I always was careful and spoke with a filter and spoke in code and never crossed the line, because here's the sad thing for me. I can recall times when men were caught in sexual sin, or, worse, kind of took our rhetoric at face value and actually confessed to sexual sin. And in those environments, I saw what happened. I saw how that guy was immediately, he was targeted, he was tarred, he was excluded, he might even have been kicked out. He might have been put under church discipline. And I participated as one of the discipliners. If I wasn't throwing the rocks, I was holding the coats. And somehow thinking that maybe this would be enough of a warning to me if I saw the misery this guy went through, that maybe I'd stop. It was perverse thinking. It didn't work. However, so I guess I can't, it makes sense that I didn't come clean during those years. I don't think it was safe in those places to come clean, to be completely honest. However, the world has changed and the church is changing. And Samson is very much part of the church, but it is a part of the church where it is safe to bring your real self and say anything. Nothing is going to get you excluded from the group. And what I find is, it's fun to watch newcomers, especially in local meetings. The new guy will come in, and he doesn't know whether to trust this group yet. And he sits there with his arms crossed, maybe even brought his Bible. When he shares really, really vaguely and carefully, and wraps it all up with a Bible verse and a testimony. And you see people just kind of lean back a little bit because, this guy isn't quite safe yet and he's not quite in. But then there comes the day he listens to people say startlingly honest things. And he starts to feel that a little freedom. Maybe it's actually safe to say it. This thing that I have been fighting by myself forever. Maybe these people would join me in that fight if I let them know. And then he finally, you can see him, it's almost like a high diver walking to the edge of the board and looking down and bouncing a while. And you're waiting. You don't know whether he's going to jump or not. And then he does. And he says it. And then what happens? Everybody moves in. Everybody moves in. And that's when life changes. I firmly believe, we say this often in Samson, that Christianity, properly understood, is a team sport, not an individual event. We are all colossal failures at solo disciples for the very simple reason Jesus doesn't have any solo disciples. That's not the program, never been the plan. We are to follow him together. He came to reconstitute the family of God, to reconcile us to God and to each other. And we cannot be truly reconciled until we're truly transparent. But when we are connected, then we experience the body of Christ. This, not an organization any longer, but an organism that's, a living, breathing thing, so closely connected that we can only move together. It's, to me, the greatest benefit of recovery. I mean, I'm so grateful my marriage survived. I'm grateful for all the healing in my family. But I'll tell you what, until I found a safe place to get help with porn, spiritually, I still loved God and desperately wanted to serve him. But in those closing few years, I was mostly just going through the motions. The spiritual awakening that comes when we find a safe place to bring ourselves is absolutely phenomenal and priceless. And I'll tell you what, if it took addiction to get me there, well then, I'm grateful for it.
You've been talking about a safe place,
Yeah.
with a safe process.
Yeah.
And the safe place is where you're able to take those first steps.
Yeah.
But the safe process is like the guardrails that keep you moving
Mhm.
forward. Because without the safe process, you just kind of go off in the middle of nowhere and you end up chasing your tail in circles.
Yeah.
And that is the path of Samson Society.
Mhm.
There's a written path that people can follow. And that really leads us into the conversation we want to have about positive sobriety. It is not just simply just will it to be done. There's a path, but there's a way to move forward. Talk to us about positive sobriety.
Yeah. So it's a very deliberate path. It's not the 12 steps. Samson isn't a 12-step group, but it's very much the same spiritual process. We describe it in 7 stages. But it starts by coming to meetings, and the next step is to find that first person that you're going to walk with. We call that person a Silas rather than a sponsor, a Silas. And then, accompanied by your Silas, you now start to take apart. You start to look in retrospect back at your life at the course and consequences of your attempts to live apart from God. And that's an illuminating process, and it's one really that we won't do until we feel safe. But then, if we're kind of prodded and pushed a little bit by a good Silas, a good friend who will, ask the questions we tend to avoid, maybe remember the things we tend to forget, maybe spot a pattern we haven't seen, right? And then it's really surrendering all of that to God, getting off the hamster wheel of self-improvement and self-help, and asking God. It's all about confession, isn't it? Isn't that what James says in James 5:16? Confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And as we do that, I'm firmly convinced that whenever we get together, everybody should have something to confess. This is not about. I think one of the dangers is, as we're going through this process, to focus exclusively on the sexual behavior. I think many of us, and I count myself in the number, kind of have this ambition to become successful Pharisees. So we somehow think that if we can so constrict our definition of sin to the sexual behavior, and we can stay between the guardrails on that, so I'm not looking at porn and I'm not whatever else, then I'm cool. Well, I might just become a real jerk. It might make me right, but to me, the great benefit of this process is that, to me, my battle with lust is the biggest lever in my life, and it gives me the opportunity to turn over the rocks and see, all the associated sinful behavior that goes along with it. Strangely enough, Allie told me years after I got into recovery that as painful as it was to know of my infidelity, what hurt more during those years was the condescending way that I treated her. Condescension was all wrapped up in that behavior. And I would never have seen it, and would never have been able to ask her forgiveness for it and be able to become more humble, less arrogant, had I not, with the help of a very intuitive sponsor early on in recovery. He's the guy that told me, he said, Nate, your biggest problem is pride. Let's look at pride. So it's with the help of another person, trusting that God is going to, and we just surrender those character defects and wounds as well. Virtually for all of us, porn use began as a maladaptive response to trauma of one kind or another. being willing to walk with another person back into those painful areas and allow God to do healing. And then there's also a process of making amends where possible. And that's a very healing thing to do. And finally, a big part of keeping recovery is giving it away. And so it's very much, mission. And I found that my own recovery took off when I started talking out loud and became willing to help other people. That's very much part of the process. So I guess that's a 90-mile-an-hour trip through the path there, Sam.
Yes, and I love what you said at the end. It's a paradox, it seems, that we get to keep what we give away.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. This has been such an incredible conversation, Nate. Let me just ask, because there are pastors, leaders, members of the church that are just really interested in finding that same connection and freedom. How do they go about getting connected with the Samson Society? What is the best path for them?
Well, shortly before COVID hit, we actually made the leap to online meetings, which have turned out to be a real boon, especially to people in ministry. It might be difficult for them to show up at a local meeting or step out to start one. So there are online Samson meetings, multiple meetings every day. Our goal is to have at least one meeting every hour of every day. We're not there yet, but we're making great progress. You can get to those meetings, and those meetings, by the way, this has gone global very quickly. So it's not just in English now, but in Italian and French and Spanish and Russian. You can find those meetings. Well, before you can get to a meeting, you're going to have to attend a newcomer meeting so that we can meet you and you can meet us and you can get oriented and we can be satisfied that you're there for your own recovery. You can sign up for a newcomer meeting by going to samsonsociety.com. There's a newcomer meeting every day. And then once you've kind of gone through that two-way interview, we're satisfied that you're real Samson material and you decide you want to join, then you get the keys and you can get into virtual meetings and you can find brothers. To me, this is amazing. Because I found recovery in physical rooms, and because I know that recovery requires relationship, I thought that it wouldn't work unless you were in a shared physical space. And now I know that's not we're not limited that way anymore. And you can find safe brothers online at samsonsociety.com.
Wonderful. We will make sure that link is in the show notes as well for everyone out there, so you can check that out. Sam?
So for about 3 years, I'll just wrap this here. Put this tidbit in. For about 3 years, 2 years, I've been meeting the same guys, Samson guys, on Thursday nights. We get together every Thursday night. We go through books. We do a lot of cool things that you don't see in a normal, regular Samson meeting. And we got to meet for the first time at the Samson Society retreat this past fall. First time we'd actually been in the same with each other. And it was like brothers having a family reunion. It was just the most beautiful and fun thing. We were hugging and everything. It was just awesome. I host the Samson Society Newcomer Meeting at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So if you decide on Tuesdays, if you decide, hey, I want to go attend Sam's Newcomer Meeting, I'm there for you. I want to see you. And but you don't have to wait for that meeting. There's newcomer meetings every day, so that you or someone that is in your congregation, in your community, can join Samson Society and be part of real life change.
Awesome.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Well, our time here is limited, so unfortunately we have to wrap up today's conversation, but thank you for joining us today, everyone. And Sam, thank you for being my partner in crime today. I appreciate it. It's always a joy working with you. So until next time, everyone, thank you for joining the Covenant Eyes Church podcast. We'll see you next time.